Why would they be stealing all our technology?
Well, one of the things, Leland, is that they have actually been testing. Now, these have been subcritical tests, which we assume have not involved fissile material. But there is some evidence to suggest that they have actually used and detonated fissile material in some of these tests. And these tests have been regular and continuous. And that means, as President Trump and as you have just said, look, these guys are testing. We've got to test too. And that's unfortunate in the sense that the nuclear arms race has started, but we didn't start it. China started it, or Russia started it by withdrawing from these treaties. But clearly, we are the party that is last to the table.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't think in a nuclear arms race, and forgive me, I'm not anywhere nearly as well-trained as the three of you or any one of you three, but I don't think last to that race is where you may want to be. We were first to the race back in 1945. Ambassador Volker, how does this change, the Cold War, the first Cold War, if you want to call it that, was the United States versus Russia. China was a very minor, if anything, player. It was a nuclear power, but a very minor player. This now appears to be a triangle rather than just a straight line of a three-part nuclear arms race. How does that change the calculus?
Yeah, I think it's slightly different than that. The Cold War, way back when, and I was a diplomat then, it was the United States and the Soviet Union, and that was the only focal point. China was not a factor, as you say. And the United States had determination, it had courage, it had capacity, and we demonstrated that there was no way that the Soviet Union would ever present a strategic threat to the United States without risking its own existence as a country. So we stared down that Soviet threat. That was back then. Now we have a Russia that is fundamentally a weak country, but one that has nuclear weapons, that is trying to scare us by saying, okay, we can brandish these nuclear weapons, we might do X, we might do Y, and so we want you to moderate your behavior. And a lot of U.S. administrations up until now have done that. They have been willing to exercise caution to avoid a confrontation with Russia. President Trump is actually calling Putin's bluff and saying, we don't believe your nuclear threats. In fact, we are much more nuclear capable than you. And that, to me, is the message of what he was saying about testing the other day. It wasn't really about testing per se. It was about, don't test me because I have the capability and I can stare you down. As it comes to China, it was also a message to China that you may have more leverage on us economically than we do on you, but we have other points of leverage, so let's make a deal. And I think that was a very successful use of that posturing as he went into his talks into Beijing. In the real world, I think we have been negotiating a standoff, a new Cold War, if you will, since about 2007, 2008, without any eruptions. I think we can continue to do that, but showing strength is the key to making sure that nothing really erupts.
Gordon, last night we had a couple of guests on the program who disagreed with my assessment that China wants to be a dominant force. If not equal to the United States, they want to replace the United States as the world's power. You saw Xi Jinping yesterday with that very frosty handshake to Donald Trump. Is there any reason that you're seeing in any actual actions by Beijing, either yesterday or leading up to yesterday, that shows they are willing or interested in moderating their desire between the Belt and Road projects, their arms race projects, their bullying of Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam, anything that they've done that shows that they are moderating that desire to replace the United States?
Yeah, I don't see anything that shows moderation. You know, if you look at what China says, it's propaganda. It's declaration of a people's war on us, which is total war. That's very clear. You know, it's they want to replace the U.S. Now, I don't have any problems with a country wanting to replace the U.S. This is competition. Every country should want to be number one. But what China is trying to do is to take down the existing international system, replace it with worldwide Chinese rule, and to destroy the United States. And yeah, I've got a problem with that because they seek the destruction of our society. So it's different. And therefore, you know, this puts all of these trade discussions in a very different context than what most people think.
General Spalding, how does the United States deal now with a problem? And obviously, this nuclear testing is part of it to show military strength. But how does this now change that you have a United States that has to confront China on one side, and they, you know, their bad acts and desire to take over Taiwan and bullying of the Philippines and everything else, and Russia wanting to invade Ukraine? It used to be that the U.S. military's doctrine was to be able to fight two major regional wars at once. They can't do that anymore. Now President Trump has to choose, doesn't he? I'm thinking that General Spalding lost us.
Yeah, sorry. The Cold War actually makes things a lot easier from a strategy perspective. I think one of the things that happened after the end of the Cold War is the United States drifted for several decades. We didn't really have what I would say a sound strategy. We didn't know where to prioritize. I think having a new Cold War actually, in terms of how the United States confronts along with allies and partners, is a lot easier to manage and allows us to prioritize in a much better way. And furthermore, you know, nuclear weapons are preeminent in a Cold War. And that's the whole point of cold. You don't want it to become hot because it becomes a nuclear war. And so I think overall, this is going to allow us to focus on building our economy, building our resiliency, building our prosperity in a way that, you know, I think the last 30 years saw us spend a lot of money in these fruitless wars, and we didn't get a lot benefit to the United States itself.
But we're going to have to spend a lot of money on weapon systems. And we've all sort of agreed here that we were the third person or the third country to this new arms race. You've got Putin with his underwater nuclear tsunami. You've got the Chinese with hypersonic missiles and carrier killers and stealth fighters that have been built using our stolen technology. Are Americans to believe that we are still qualitatively, quantitatively ahead of both the Russians and the Chinese in the way we were, say, in the 60s and 70s and 80s?
In a conventional sense, absolutely not. In fact, you know, when you look at the weapons arrayed on the Chinese side of the Taiwan Strait, they're really overwhelming. And of course, we've been spending a lot in Ukraine. But in a nuclear sense, we're at a standoff, and I don't think that we have anything to fear in terms of either Russia or China, as long as we maintain.
But I just want to be clear. In a conventional sense, you're saying we are outgunned?
Oh, absolutely. 100%
Wow.
outgunned. And I think, you know, that's why our nuclear weapons are so important. But don't forget,
Stunning.
We chose not to meet the Soviet Union in the Fulda Gap because we knew it would bankrupt our economy. So this is nothing new. It was actually a strategy that Eisenhower ushered in, and it really held sway throughout the 40 years of the Cold War. I think it's a good strategy when it comes to the overall prosperity of the United States and our allies and partners.
Gordon, just in 30 seconds, we put up these headlines, and I thought that was pretty interesting. People's Daily, Xi says, ready to work with Trump to build solid foundation for bilateral ties. SMCP, Trump, Xi meeting closer to durable peace as China walks away looking stronger. This is how it's playing inside of China. Xi says ready to work with Trump to build solid foundation for bilateral ties. Is there any reason to take anything the Chinese are saying at face value?
One word answer, no. Of course not. I mean, really what they're doing is this is China with these bland general statements that are meant to soothe everybody. But we know that they cheat. We know that they lie. We know that they steal. And they will continue to do that until someone stops them. And right now, you know, President Trump has decided not to stop them.
I liked your one word, Gordon. I was going to follow it up with, you know, they're lying when their lips are moving. Bob Spalding, Gordon Chang, Ambassador Kurt Volker, gentlemen, thank you all very much.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.